doing this correctly. So you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Okay. Well, hey, want to welcome everybody here. I think we have a few folks that have joined us, and we're going to talk about paying for long-term care with the VA pension, or what's known as aid in attendance. And so my name is John Watts. I'm a lawyer in Alabama, and then have Davis Nelson here. And Davis, tell everybody where you're from.
I am located in Roswell, Georgia, and we also have an office in Charlotte.
Okay. And Davis and I try and do this about every week or so, and that is to talk about this benefit, because we get a good number of questions in, and of course we're happy to answer those one at a time when we talk with people, but also if we can start sharing those questions and answers about this benefit, because there's a lot of, I guess, Davis, we'd say misinformation about this benefit. And let me give you the real quick version here of what this benefit is. It is a what's called non-service related, so nothing to do with being injured in the military. It just says if we're in the military during the right period of time, and then now, let's say I need somebody to help me take a bath, or I have Alzheimer's or dementia, then this benefit can help me and help my family by paying up to $25,000 a year tax-free. And we've covered the benefits or the requirements of this in other videos, so I'll just do the real quick version. There's the military requirement, the financial requirement, and the health or disability requirement. So, Davis, why don't we go ahead and get started? And if somebody has a question about those basic benefits or requirements, we can jump into those, or they can watch a previous video. But let me share with you what happened to me. Actually, it was yesterday, Davis. I was speaking with somebody really about a completely unrelated matter, and they said, well, I'm taking care of my mother because she can't live alone. And we got talking a little bit further, and she said, yes, she gets her VA check. And so I'm going, okay, well, what check is that? And said, well, it's $900 a month because Dad was in the military during, I think it was the Korean War. And I said, well, is it aid in attendance? And she said, yes. And I said, well, why is it not $1,100? Because that's the maximum. It's only $900. And she said, I have no idea. I take care of Mother, 24/7. And so I said, well, get me the award letter so we can look at that. And what she said was something kind of strange. And then before we started this, you gave me some insight on it, Davis. She said, well, I'm not sure that we have the award letter. And so you were telling me before we went live that you were seeing cases where people get their award before they get their award letter from the VA. So talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is a continuing problem that we see. Actually, just this week, we got the award letter for a client who was approved last summer. And so the money showed up in June or so of last year, but we didn't have the award letter explaining the basis for the decision until this week. And even though we had made many calls to the VA to try to get it, because one of the things we always like to have that document and go through it very carefully, because believe it or not, the VA does make mistakes now and again. And so we want to make sure that it was a sound decision. If the VA made a mistake or we made a mistake, we want to correct those errors. So it's very important to read that letter and to understand it thoroughly to make sure that there's not something, for example, that you need to report back to the VA about the error. But one of the things we have noticed this year as approvals are coming through is that the money is showing up sometime months prior to actually receiving the award letter itself. It used to be, like last year, it only happened occasionally, but now it seems like just about every time we have an approval, we're having the money show up before the award letter. Now, we did notice something interesting. When we start calling about clients regularly, and we're doing more of that this year, mainly because there's been these longer delays this year than we're experiencing just last year. The VA has been giving us a little bit of, for the first time really, giving us insight into what's going on behind the scenes. So this latest approval we had, which was yesterday, I think, we had called about a week ago, and the representative of the VA said that, I said, I see here that it's supposed to have final approval about the 15th of this month. And then sure enough, here yesterday, that was the 11th, the money showed up. We still have not seen the award letter and have no idea when we'll see that. But I just would caution everybody to make sure that when that letter comes in, to read it very, very carefully, compare it with your results to make sure that you're getting everything you're entitled to and no more. Just be careful about that. And if you don't understand it, find somebody to help you.
Yeah, and I'll say this about the VA. There are a lot of things we can and should criticize them for. But the award letter, at least in my experience, and I'm curious about you, Davis, it's a pretty good letter. It says, all right, here's what you applied for. Here's the test. Here's your result. Here's why we're doing it this way. And so you can read that. And if this is the maximum and you're only getting this much, there may be an explanation in there, should be an explanation in there. And it may be something that we can correct, or it may be something that the VA needs to correct. But definitely encourage people, regardless of the amount that they get from the VA, read that letter.
Absolutely, especially if you're getting less money than the maximum. So you need to know the maximum and what you're getting and see what the difference is. Because in just about, I won't say in every case, but the vast majority of people that we talk to, we're able to, if they're getting less than the maximum, very often we can get them the additional money, at least going forward.
Right. And I put a link on here, Davis. It's actually to your website, davisnelsonlaw.com/MDJ. And if people go there, they can get in essence, a checklist, right? Regardless of whether this is the veteran or spouse or children or surviving spouse. And they can get a checklist that's, I've seen it because you and I do a lot of work together, and it's a very nice little checklist without being overwhelming. Now, you and I both have books, and we have, just a ton of materials for people. So we'll definitely share anything that people want, but that's a nice, was it a one-page checklist?
It is one page. I think the one that we have on the website now has one for the veteran on one side, and on the reverse side is one for the surviving spouse. Incidentally, that's been, since we redesigned that, made it a little clearer, a little simpler to understand, it's been extremely popular with people. And matter of fact, when they get that, sometimes rather than call, they'll send us a nice letter of explanation, and they'll have checked off the items and explaining why they think they qualify and ask us to give them a call.
Ah, well, that's good. That's good. Well, let's jump into some of our questions here. Well, and I guess I should have done this, Davis, to make the powers that be happy. This is not legal advice. We're not, your lawyer. We're not telling you what to do. This is for general educational advice about this benefit, which is really a remarkable benefit if you're struggling with long-term care for a parent or a spouse, either at home or assisted living or even a nursing home. So let me jump into the first question that we received, and that is, my father died at age 58. My mother is 63. So does she qualify because she's under 65? And they go on to say they need to provide help with dressing and bathing and things like that. But So the question is, if the surviving spouse is below that 65 age mark, are they qualified or disqualified?
Well, certainly the surviving spouse remains potentially eligible for the benefit so long as the widow is not remarried. Eligibility for the surviving spouse is not dependent on whether the veteran ever claimed the benefit or not. So in most of the cases that we see when we talk to a widow, the veteran did not claim it, usually on account they didn't even know it was available. So the surviving spouse can become eligible for it. It's actually, in some ways, it's actually a little easier to become eligible as the surviving spouse, or not so much eligible, but you can get it at an earlier age if you need it. If you remember when we talked about this last time, I described how at age 65, the veteran is presumed to be totally and permanently disabled. And if you're under age 65, then the veteran has a higher burden of proof medically in those cases. But when it comes to the surviving spouse, as long as that person is permanently and totally disabled, then they can get this benefit at any age. There's no distinction, but like there is for the veteran.
Right. And when we say permanent and total disability, in this context, what we're talking about is it could be dementia, Alzheimer's, it could be a terrible back injury. I mean, this could be a drunk driver hitting us, and now our kids need to help, dress us, bathe us, things of that nature. And regardless of our age, if we're a surviving spouse, then we would be eligible for this benefit.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, I'll give you just an example this morning. I was talking earlier today with a veteran, Vietnam era, who is 64, and he is currently on Social Security disability. And so all we need to do, since he's under age 65, to prove his disability is to produce a letter from the Social Security Administration that he is on SSD, and that will count as proof. And that should be all he needs, in addition to the regular medical evidence that we prove, that is, that he's in need of the aid and attendance of somebody else. It's actually very easy for somebody who's under age 65 to prove disability.
Yeah, and let me just say this about being at that younger age, 64, 54, even 34. This is a benefit we think of normally as, for older folks, but we could be a veteran and have served during a time of war. And we talked about this last week. We've been in a state of war since 1990. So there's a whole generation, really 2 generations of people that could have been military veterans, wartime veterans here.
Yep.
And it could be, like I mentioned, a drunk driver. It could be a stroke. It could be a workplace injury. Just whatever it is that has caused even somebody at a young age to need help, to need the aid and attendance of somebody else, whether that's a family or folks at an assisted living facility, home health, whoever that is. So while we normally think of it as that older age, we want everybody that's watching this to keep in mind that it doesn't really matter the age. If we need the help, then we can usually qualify for it. Absolutely.
And it's good to keep in mind, too, that this benefit often is used, since Desert Storm coming forward and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, we've seen so many people with disabling injuries of one kind or another. But occasionally we do see people who are younger compared to our oldest typical client. But those people often can use this particular benefit as a bridge to where they're getting a higher percentage of service-connected disability funds. Keep in mind, the veteran may be eligible for both of these, and they're always entitled to the greater of the two. But sometimes this benefit will be more than a disability, a service-connected disability. So if you're only getting a 10% service-connected disability, for a hand injury, then this benefit could produce more money than the service-connected disability.
Right, and to follow up on your, I think you called it a bridge. But let's describe it this way. So I could apply for a service-related injury today, and typically that's going to take me probably 5 years to actually get that benefit. And so what do I do in the meantime? Well, if I qualify for this VA pension or aid in attendance, that can bridge that gap until I can get that higher award. So definitely encourage people, if you have any type of potential claim with the VA, check out your options. Whether it's service related, non-service related, it never hurts to ask. And really, nobody should be charging you just to answer a question for you. So definitely want to encourage people to ask. So, well, let me move on to the next question. And this is something that is needed, Davis, but a lot of times it's a little tricky to get. And that is, how do I get either mine or maybe my parent or my uncle, my aunt, how do I get my DD-214? And so explain what that is and how do we get it?
Well, since 1950, the form that demonstrates the nature of your discharge, it'll also have other information like your dates of your active duty, is the form DD-214. And prior to that, there were a lot of other military documents that were used. But anybody who left the service after 1950 probably has a DD-214 in their file. And for the most part, those records are stored at the giant National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. So the most common way that we obtain a DD-214 is by asking the folks in St. Louis to produce a copy. And because what you need in order to file, in particular for this, for pension, the non-service connected benefit, you need to produce either an original or a certified copy of your discharge papers. Now, let me warn people that there are other documents that say discharge on them that don't qualify for this purpose. And typically, those are the ones that are produced by the various services themselves for the purpose of awarding medals and for certain other purposes. But the official one, if you will, is the DD-214 or equivalent in an earlier time. So we'll ask the Record Center in St. Louis to produce that, to give us, typically they'll give us 3 certified copies. And people like that because they get to keep their original, which was given to them at the time they were discharged from the service, and they don't want to surrender that unless they have to. Although they are willing to give it up if it'll pay them another $2,000 in benefits. So
Sure.
But they'd rather not. Okay. So we'll apply. There is a form that can be used to request your information, and that is called an SF-180, SF-180. And that document can be used to request a copy. And you can mail it in. There is a fax number. They have kind of an emergency line that if you're going to use this for government benefits, you can get two reasons you might want to fax it in. Is the first, they can turn the request around much faster. Usually we're getting them in about 10 days. If you just mail it in and don't say the right wording on the form, then I've heard that the Personnel Center is running about 3 months behind. And really, you need that certified or original along with your claim to file it. So there is a way to do it by fax, and we do have personal contact with these people. We know these people by name, and they're used to getting our calls, help us turn these around so we can get the claims in on time, because it means money to these folks here. And sometimes if you're waiting 3 months for benefits, for a married veteran, that can cost them over $6,000 in lost benefits if you can't get your claim in. Now, we did talk last time about the informal claim, but very often you'll end up delaying your claim and thus losing benefits. But there are other ways. For example, a lot of people, not a lot of people, we see this on a regular basis, is that people took their original discharge papers when they got out of the service, and they recorded them with the here in Georgia with the Superior Court records with the court, and therefore you can get a certified copy that you file the original, and that will work. Now, there are some other ways to do it, but those are the most common ways that we see.
Okay. And I've added into the comments, which hopefully is showing up on about the right side of the screen here. But it's a website, get my DD214, so that's 214.com. And that is a URL that we own, but we've just set that up to redirect it to the web page at the archives. And so that may save people a little bit of time, because sometimes you're in here typing, trying to go, which website do I go to? Yeah. So hopefully that'll be helpful. And if you have any question, you can always give us a call. And so actually, let's give people, we'll just give them your phone number, Davis, and because you've got, the staff in place to take these calls, and you and I typically work on these together anyway.
Okay, I'll give you my the number in Georgia. If it comes to me, we have a toll-free number. I can't recall it at the moment, but you can call 404-348-4263, 404-348-4263. And you'll probably talk to my assistant, Susan Murray, and tell her you'd like to get a copy of your DD214. And I think she can actually send you one that has the appropriate language that we put in to the form, so that St. Louis won't try to charge you for that.
Right, because sometimes here recently they've been charging, was it $25 or something, Davis? I forget the amount.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the amount. If Susan were here, she could tell me off the top of her head. But ordinarily, our clients don't have to pay for that. That's a charge we can avoid.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Our next question has to do with what is an ADL, or activity of daily living? And like a lot of things with the VA, sometimes the same word is used, but in this context it means this, and in another context something different. So what does the VA mean about ADLs in an aid and attendance context?
Great question. The phrase activities of daily living, you also find it in other areas of the law, for example, in the Medicaid area. But if you look carefully at the law and the regulations, you compare Medicaid with VA, you'll see that the definitions appear to be a little different in a few kind of subtle ways. So very often, if you make assumptions about something, you have experience with activities of daily living in the Medicaid context, it may not, when you get to ground level and making decisions, it may be a little bit different in the VA than you find in the Medicaid law area. Activities of daily living refer to things that assistance that can be provided to a VA claimant for their care. And typically, it includes things like bathing, dressing and undressing, transportation, a lot of other that maybe help with financial matters. But if you provide those kind of that kind of help, and you have the aid and attendance medical rating, then you can pay someone for your care and treat that payment as a medical deduction and reducing your income for VA purposes. But the idea behind it is that if the VA determines that you need help with at least 2 of those activities of daily living, then the VA will rate you aid and attendance medically.
Okay, and that's that. We talked about this last week. Aid and attendance is the highest level of this VA pension. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, there is another one called housebound. As a practical matter, we rarely see anybody who can be rated as housebound. I'm not sure exactly why medically that is so, but and we see it on rare occasions. But I bet we don't see more than 3 or 4 a year out of several hundred clients. So it happens, but for some reason we just don't see it all that much. And it's important which rating you have, because the aid and attendance rating positions you to earn a larger benefit than it does for housebound.
And Davis, I think you've run into the same thing. If somebody, they may qualify for housebound, but normally if they qualify for housebound, they also would qualify for aid and attendance. In other words, if somebody says, I cannot leave my house on my own, I cannot drive, I cannot walk, probably they're going to need help with those, activities of daily living, like bathing, dressing, getting up and down out of a chair, etc.
Yes, and it's significant to remember that you can treat this kind of care as being a medical expense, even though the provider is not a skilled medical person and it's not a skilled service that's being provided. So you can treat as a deductible medical expense the cost of care that really is non-skilled care, but will still be treated as a medical expense.
Okay. Yeah, that brings up, let me jump to this question. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. What is a caregiver agreement and why do I need one? And I think this will fit in nicely with what you just said, Davis, about this whole idea of medical expenses. Yeah. And even though it says medical expenses, that may be really money we're paying to help dress, to help bathe, to make sure we don't fall when we're in the shower, that type of thing.
Correct. The idea behind the VA benefit and how much you get varies inversely with what your income is. So the higher your income, the lower the benefit. And in fact, you can't earn the maximum pension unless your gross income minus medical expenses is 0, or in fact, the way it works out, a little bit negative. And so if somebody isn't getting the maximum benefit, so let's say they're only getting $200 or $300 or $400 a month, and if you're a widow, the maximum eligible pension, if she's rated aid and attendance, would be $1,149 a month. So how do you go from $400 to $1,149? And the caregiver contract or the caregiver arrangement is one way to do that, because it allows you to pay a loved one or family member for your care and for the care that you need, and in the process increase your deductible medical expenses, drive your income down, and thus earn a larger benefit. Now, you've got to understand the way that particular benefit works. There are various components. The gross income part is not the same as it is for income tax purposes. So there are quite a few things that will count as VA income, but will not be counted as income for tax purposes, believe it or not. The other thing is not all medical deductions, all medical expenses are medical deductions. Only those that are deemed recurring from month to month. Thus, for example, if you're paying, even though you're paying it every month, if you're making a drug co-payment that amounts to $100 a month, you won't be able to include that as a deduction in the calculation of your net income for VA purposes.
Yeah, I've always thought that was, I'll just say silly. That, I go apply to the VA and I say, I've been on this blood pressure medicine for the last 27 years, and doctor says, if I don't take it, I'll die. And they go, well, how do we know you're going to take it every month?
Yeah.
Well, if I'm alive, I'm taking it.
It is ridiculous. And the whole calculation probably needs to be rethought by Congress, really, and make some fundamental changes in the law. Because in order to get the maximum benefit, the only way is your medical expenses have to exceed your total income, which means the VA doesn't give you any credit for certain luxuries in their view, like food, cost of housing, transportation, clothing. These kinds of things are not deductible in arriving at the amount that determines the benefit. So that's why I say it's like the VA is treating that as a living expenses as a luxury.
Well, and on the caregiver agreement, I'll mention this, and I think we've touched on this in some of our previous videos, Davis, that we cannot say, well, here's the VA, that's all I'm focused on, because we have Medicaid out there. Now, Medicaid is, as a practical matter, what pays for a nursing home. And just like you said, gross income means one thing with the VA, one thing with the IRS. Well, a caregiver agreement, it may be fine for the VA, but for example, here in Alabama, I think it's wrong. I think it violates Medicaid law, but this is what at least our code says, our state code says a caregiver agreement, it has to be written into there that but for this care that the caregiver is providing, you would have to go to a nursing home. And a doctor has to bless that, not necessarily in the caregiver agreement, but in some document. Now, that is not what federal law says, in my opinion, but it just, we have to understand we've got the VA, we have Medicaid, they have different rules, and we've got to coordinate these to really have a good, solid, long-term care strategy. Absolutely.
And one thing we try to do is to anticipate those kind of problems, even though they don't come. What you just described about the Alabama Medicaid issue, we try to account for that. So we do it in sort of overkill, if you will, and we make sure that the right wording gets in there, just in case we run into a particular person at the VA who's being a little tougher, because there's a lot of subjective decision making that is handed over to the VA, and we want to anticipate everything we possibly can. So we try to make sure that the right wording is in the medical documents and that kind of thing. The other thing I wanted to mention, it's so important, as you've heard me say 1,000 times, you can't do VA planning in a vacuum. There's always something else that gets affected. And I'd just like to give you one example of talking to a couple this morning. And in the process of the discussion and going over about whether this was the right time or whether we should go ahead and apply for the VA benefit now or later, was that there were certain things that got affected. For example, if we solve one problem for VA purposes, for example, if somebody's net worth is too high, then we have to figure out a solution to that VA problem. But in the process, we may create a problem in another area. So we ended up this morning talking about the effects of the VA planning on his estate planning. Then we talked a little bit about the implications of Medicaid. And so if we have a caregiver who is receiving Social Security disability, then we don't want to do something, pay a caregiver an amount that will cause the caregiver to lose their benefit. So there's a whole range of benefits and other issues that come up in just about every one of these cases, but the very simplest.
Right. There's a lot of moving parts to it.
Yes.
So we've got to, not get that tunnel vision, but kind of look out at everything to make sure that we're understanding it.
Yes. Yes.
Let's see. The next question I have is really about annuities and being sold annuities in an assisted living facility. But if I can, Davis, let's take a step back. And so I'll ask you this question first. What is an annuity?
An annuity is basically a stream of income that you're receiving as a result of having paid some money in to somebody else. For example, you go to an insurance company, and the insurance company says, if you can pay me $50,000 right now, we will pay you $500 a month for the rest of your life. It gives somebody a predictable level of income because, as we know today, the yield on investments for the most part is very low. So they may have just cash sitting in earning 1% in a savings account, or a money market fund, or in stocks, and the stock market is down. So people really like annuities. But annuities can be a great solution, but they can also cause problems. And they tend to be very complex instruments when it comes to planning for VA and Medicaid and for other reasons as well, because there are two essential parts to a lot of people. Let's give an example. Somebody has $100,000 in an IRA, and they might take half of that and turn $50,000 into an annuity. So now you've only got $50,000 in your IRA, but you also now have a stream of income that will come in, typically over your life expectancy. Ordinarily, you can't. If you want certain tax benefits, you want Medicaid benefits and other things here, you basically the stretch out is going to be no longer than what your life expectancy is going to be. So they tend to be, people love them, and they're very popular. The financial people sell them very aggressively. A lot of people call themselves financial planners, really are product pushers of annuities, and they're very popular. But in buying an annuity, you can also cause yourself problems later on under the Medicaid law if you need skilled nursing care. It can give you problems qualifying for VA. So the kind of annuity, for the ordinary person, they need to know a lot more about it than they ordinarily do in choosing an annuity, and including such things as, if I have to cash this in at some time in the future, am I going to have to pay a 20% penalty and lose 20% of the value by cashing it in? So just about any decision you make with annuities today, one, the financial planners don't want you to talk to anybody about it, but you really need to talk with somebody who knows about annuity, who's not connected, won't benefit from the sale of it, before you sign on the dotted line. Is that more than you really wanted on that?
No.
I feel passionately about this particular subject.
No, I understand. A couple thoughts. Number one is annuities typically have very high commission. Well, there's nothing wrong with your financial planner, your insurance agent making money, because they got to pay their bills too.
Yeah.
But just understand that, you may be purchasing a $100,000 annuity, and there may be a pretty large commission on that. So, but now when we're talking about somebody is like this question, in an assisted living facility, they're trying to get the VA pension benefits that can be, in essence, the VA benefits are like an annuity, a couple $1,000s a month, tax-free for the rest of your life. Then the typical annuity that's sold is going to disqualify you from this benefit and can cause lots of problems with Medicaid. Davis, when you and I use annuities in elder law, these are not really investment annuities. These are annuities to say, we've got too much in net worth, let's turn that into a stream of payments, which is income, and then we can qualify. So if, to the person that asked the question, if we are thinking about an annuity and we're thinking about the VA pension or even Medicaid, it really would be smart to sit down with somebody, not just the salesman, but sit down and find out, how's this going to impact me? It might be fine. It might be a wonderful move, or it could be a disaster that costs a tremendous amount of money. So I guess we're both saying just be very careful with annuities. If I've got this pen here, this pen can be great. I can write with it.
Yeah.
I also stab my eye with it. So, with annuities, they can be wonderful tools. They can also be unintentional weapons that hurt us. So let's just be careful.
Right. Well, certainly the so-called single premium annuity, I can't remember what all four letters stand for, the single premium immediate annuity. So,
Right,
excuse me. There's so many misconceptions about them all around the world. I was just reading last evening that in California, that the state is trying to shut off the use of single premium immediate annuities, even though it can be a wonderful solution to many problems. So in the idea they want to save certain people from themselves by just shutting it off entirely. So they're eliminating solutions that were previously available. Now, so far, it's only California that's done that. But annuities can be a tremendous tool in the right circumstance, but it can be a very costly one in the wrong situation.
Right. Okay, so here's another question we received. If my father's awarded this benefit, does the money go to him or does it go straight to the assisted living facility? Now, you and I know the benefit, we can get this benefit if we're at home, nursing home, assisted living, but let's say we're in an assisted living. Where does the money go, Davis?
Well, we talk to people who are in assisted living today, and they may have come to us because they want to look into getting a larger benefit. So they've asked us to help them. But in many of those cases, we do find that the direct deposit has been shifted from the beneficiary's account directly to the assisted living. So the money is actually being deposited into the assisted living facility's bank account rather than the veteran or the widow who earned that benefit. That's a fairly common thing, and I don't see anything wrong with it. But it's a way to make sure that the assisted living facility's monthly bill gets paid every month.
Right. And I guess maybe the take-home lesson of this is if I'm the veteran and I get awarded this benefit, it is my money. Now, I might say, well, I want it deposited in this assisted living facility because that is just more convenient for me. But this is different than Medicaid, where Medicaid, you don't have a choice. The money goes to the facility. Here, it's the veteran or the surviving spouse's money, and then they can choose, do I want it in my Regions account or my Merrill Lynch account or to go to the assisted living facility?
That's a great point. And that's why this particular benefit is so flexible, because it gets paid directly to the person who's entitled to it, who can then go out and purchase exactly the kind of care that they want. And it happens to be that for the vast majority of our clients, they want to use that money to continue to live at home rather than have to go to assisted living even, and certainly not to a nursing home. Whereas Medicaid gets paid to the third party provider directly. And so it's a one size fit all. I mean, other than the color of the walls inside the nursing home.
Right. And the other thing, just since we're kind of on this topic, with Medicaid, and there are some things, sometimes they're called Medicaid waivers or community program, but as a practical matter, Medicaid is just nursing home. So with this VA pension, it could be our child or a grandchild or a friend who is taking care of us, and we can pay that family member or that friend and use that to be able to qualify for this benefit. And so in essence, then we're getting this money in to be able to pay for our care so we can stay at home. And with Medicaid, you just don't have that option.
That's right. Interesting you mentioned the Medicaid waiver, because I was just talking with an Atlanta legal aid lawyer yesterday about Medicaid waivers and the interaction with the VA benefit, because I told her that we ordinarily don't see people in the Medicaid waiver program. And I was asking her, I said, I know we typically see when sometimes our clients have to leave home and go into a nursing home, and the only way to pay for it is with Medicaid. And when that happens, typically what happens is the VA will reduce its benefit to down to no more than $90 a month. And basically, Medicaid is picking up the difference. It may be $7,000 a month for there. And I was asking her, neither of us knew for sure. I said, now it looks to me that there should be a lot of overlap between the kind of VA clients we see and the Medicaid waiver clients that she was talking about. And I said, in that case, are we going to see a reduction in the VA benefit by going on the waiver program? And neither of us knew the answer. So we decided we're going to do a little research and talk about this again, because we just don't know the answer to that. But it raises a very interesting question here as to how far the Medicaid rule and how far the VA rule about reducing the VA benefit when Medicaid becomes the payer of last resort, whether we're going to see it in the waiver program as well. And right now, I just don't know for sure what the answer to that question is.
Well, you've got 7 days to research that before next Friday. So who needs sleep, right? You can figure that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Or you just, bug her, make her find the answer.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
Hopefully she's not watching this. So, okay. Well, this is a question, and I think it's prompted by some issues in Medicaid, which we may or may not get into. But the question is, mom is in an assisted living facility. She owns her house, and she's not coming home. Will the VA count her house as part of her net worth and thereby disqualify her from these benefits?
Typically, your house and the immediate surroundings of the property will be treated as an exempt asset. And regardless of the value, the VA will not count that against you as to accounting your net worth. There is a question occasionally that comes up about, is there a change in the character of the property from being your home today to something else? For example, if you go into assisted living and you rent out your house, is it still exempt at that time, or have you converted it into rental business property, basically? And while I don't see the VA trying that, I can't remember even having seen that in the recent past. But there are issues there. But when you go into the assisted living facility now, is your home still eligible for what's known as the Section 121 tax exemption on your home? Up to whatever it is, $500,000 or so. So your home is your home, not counted for VA purposes. But when you change the character of it, remember that if it changes for VA, which probably would be the last to happen, but it might make a difference for Medicaid and for income taxes as well. So you've got to be very careful about this before making a decision. If I can mention one other thing, keep in mind that your home, if it doesn't count towards your net worth, that's great. But if you turn around while you're receiving benefits and sell the home, in effect, convert your home, an exempt asset, into countable cash, you now may find yourself with excessive net worth, and you may lose that benefit, at least temporarily, until you can solve your excessive net worth problem.
Right. And some of these rules maybe don't always make sense. So, with Medicaid, typically Medicaid says, we're not going to count your house, but if you're single, then when you die, we'll have added up all the Medicaid payments we made, and then we'll put a lien on your house. So a lot of people say, well, Medicaid will take your house while you're alive. Well, no, they don't take it while you're alive. They may put a lien on it for, at the time that you die. But same thing you mentioned, Davis, about under the VA, under Medicaid, if you sell your house, well, now you've got all this cash, and so you may disqualify yourself from Medicaid. So just so many of these things we might look at and go, well, what difference does it make if I have a $200,000 house sitting there empty versus me selling it and having $200,000 in cash? What's the difference? Well, it makes a difference. Just like if I own my house, I can get that mortgage deduction, but if I'm renting my identical house, I don't get the deduction. Well, why does that make sense? It doesn't, but that's just the rules. So
one lobbying group had a better lobbying effort than
right.
somebody else.
Apparently I guess the realtors and the mortgage brokers were a little bit better than the apartment people. So, so some of this, it doesn't necessarily make sense. We just have to figure out what the rules are and then comply with those rules. And that's really if I can say it this way, that's the whole name of the game here is understand the rules and then make sure you follow the rules. But just like if this is the limit of the rules, we don't want to go beyond the rules. But we also should be comfortable going up to the rule. The rule when I'm driving down I-65 is 70 miles an hour. That doesn't mean I have to go 45. It means don't go over 70. So, 69 is fine.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say on behalf of the VA here, speak for them, but I find for the most part, the people that we talk to at the VA are reasonable people, and they're really willing to help, and they're really good folks. And so much of the troubles I think that we hear about the VA are the problems that arise as a result of decisions by the senior administrators rather than the day-to-day folks that we deal with. So I think they're reasonable. Now, they will enforce the rules pretty strictly. If you violate a rule, you're going to find out about it, and it may cost you the benefit. But these folks are willing to work with us and work with our clients. And if you're reasonable with them, it's going to be reciprocated.
Yeah, and I'll say this, and I certainly have criticized the VA on more than one occasion, but there's one case I'm thinking of where we submitted a VA aid and attendance package, and it was my mistake. I left something off. And so I get this nice letter, and it says, hey, right here, number 4, and they circled it in red ink and said, please get us this information. And so, okay, send them a letter. Here's what you requested. I'm sorry, it's my mistake. And, approved like that. Yeah. So, when you have, I forget how many people there, David, 100,000 employees or something. I mean, it's, of course, you're going to have certain ones that are not good, but the vast, overwhelming majority that we deal with are very fair, conscientious, and they're trying to do their job, which is to help veterans get the benefits they're entitled to, not more than they're entitled to, but to get what they're entitled to. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Let's see. I think, Davis, that was the last question that we had that was submitted ahead of time. Let's see. We've got a few minutes left here. If anybody else has a question, and I'll check our comments here. I don't see any. Let me type in your website, Davis, and that is davisnelsonlaw.com, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if you, earlier in the show, let me get this, and we'll see if I can drop this in again. This other link that I just put up, that will take you to a little form to get a checklist. Davis has a very nice checklist. He and I have all sorts of very lengthy materials that you're welcome to look at, but this is a 1 or 2 page checklist that's very helpful. And then my website, apparently I can't talk and type at the same time, Davis, is alabamaelderlawyer.com. And so we have information about Medicaid, estate planning, and certainly this VA pension or VA benefits. So, Davis, any final thoughts here, unless we get any additional questions?
Well, I was just going to say that I would recommend that it's really easy to get overwhelmed by the amount of material about this and then try to sort through it. So the little questionnaire that we've done will give you sort of the checkpoints of eligibility, to give you the idea whether you're a good candidate or not for VA pension. And that's why I recommend, we have other things that we give out, but I don't recommend you starting with a 100-page book on this. So start with that questionnaire. And then I think after that, if you want to know more, then at that point, I think when you get to the little thank you page, you can sign up for 20 little videos that I've done, which answer the 20 most frequently asked questions that we see. Actually, it's 10 questions that we think that are 10 most often that we get asked, and then 10 more that are answered questions that I think people, if they knew more, would ask about the benefit. So if you think of it as a step process, try to ease into it just a little bit and digest that questionnaire. If you have questions, email me. And then if you want, get those little videos. I think we send out a link to a video about every 2 or 3 days, but it'll give you, and each video is only no more than 2 or 3 minutes is all it is, but just to give you a high level response to these frequently asked questions. I think people will find that very helpful.
Okay, well, thank you. And we will, again, try to do this every Friday at about 1 o'clock Central Time, 2 o'clock. Since Davis is in Atlanta, he's on Eastern Time there. And let's see, Davis, why don't you give out your phone number one more time, and then we'll see if any final questions and wrap it up.
Okay, I still haven't remembered our toll-free number, but it's on the website. But the number is 404-348-4263. And if you go to our website, then you'll also see the toll-free number there. Okay.
And if somebody's in Alabama, you can still call Davis, or you can call my firm at 205-879-2447. And if you have questions that you'd like us to answer, you can go to any of those websites and leave us a question, or we're still trying to figure out Blab. So maybe there's a way you can send us a direct question through our Blab profile or whatever it's called. And we'll add that to our list, and we will do this again next time. So good to see you, Davis, and appreciate everybody that's been on here.
Good seeing you, John. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.